takes more than finding a niche to get your podcast noticed. In any given niche, I can almost guarantee there'll be at least a dozen or even 100 other podcasts sharing your space. In this episode, I'm joined by Massimo Zefferino, design agency owner and host of The Angry Designer. And he uncovers the elements of your podcast design and branding and your personal branding that will help to get you to stand out in this busy podcasting landscape. In this episode, we cover expert podcast branding advice from a graphic design agency owner and how to put together podcast cover art that turns heads. How Massimo grew his personal brand and podcast with true authenticity. The keys to creating a magnetic persona as a podcasting host, and much more. So don't miss this opportunity to learn from a design expert. He knows what it takes to craft a podcast worthy of its loyal following. So Massimo, thank you for joining me on Podcasting Amplified. How's it going?
Great. How you doing?
Yeah, all good, thanks. So Massimo Zefferino joins me today, and he and Sean Carlisle host The Angry Designer, which is a noble graphic design podcast that cuts through the industry jargon and nonsense to help frustrated graphic designers survive and thrive. And it's a co-hosted podcast, but they also do the odd interview as well. And they have little dope or nope episodes where they're reviewing new logos as well. And it's been going for around 4 or so years now. I don't suppose you could just take us back to when you started the podcast, why you started it, and sort of what you've gotten out of it and what you hope to bring your audience.
Absolutely. So we did start the podcast, during COVID. It was during the first little bit of COVID, and it was a frustrating time for everybody. And, it was something that I felt I've wanted to do for a long time. But when we started the podcast, COVID was the perfect opportunity to take advantage of this because our mission with the podcast, we're not so much, although our podcast is very targeted to graphic designers, we're not a design podcast. And what I mean by that is there's so much more to, the flight of the graphic designer other than how to create a logo or, how to lay out a website and what have you. There's the business side, but even more so the struggles, the frustrations, burnout is a real big problem in our space. Same with ageism. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to actually reach out to, to people like us going through the same struggles and let them know that they're not actually alone, especially during a time like COVID when everybody is legitimately alone, stuck, working remotely in their house. And it was pretty quick that a lot of people just right away were very, they related to what we were saying because at that time, most of the podcasts, the graphic design podcasts out there would be people talking very lightly, about the business side, but mostly they would talk about logo reviews and this and that, where we just wanted to hit it hard and be like, we have really crappy clients and this is the crap that we go through. We have really bad timelines often. This is how we get through those. We, are almost on the verge of burning out and this is how we got around it. Those were the things that people needed to hear but weren't. And it could be just because of our brash personalities and this whole no fear, we're just going to say what we feel and what we feel people want to hear and kind of go with it. The big thing is that what our podcast is about isn't necessarily, we're not going out in public and saying this is the truth and you have to do it this way. We're saying, we've been doing this for 25 years. We've grown a 7-figure, creative agency. We have, $1 billion customers. This is what we did. And this is our experiences going through it. And if you can gain a little bit of knowledge from this, great. If not, find another way to do it. That's okay too. So, I think that's a big difference from our show is we're not saying that, there's only one way to do things. We're saying this is what worked for us and hopefully, it can work for you too. And just by putting it out there, it just, the response was really positive and people really needed to hear, the message, the words, the stories and experiences because they all felt the same way, but nobody was really coming out and talking about it. So, and this is a space that I am extremely passionate about. It's the only thing I ever wanted to do my entire life. So by being able to put this back out to the people, back to the space that gifted me this beautiful life, I felt good. I felt like this is what I was meant to do, the second half of my career. So, still going good. I mean, again, there's still no intentions of bailing, anytime ever, really. As long as I can keep doing this, I don't see any end in sight. But we'll see. We'll see how fun the future becomes.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that authenticity out in your personal brands. And I know that gets thrown around a lot at the moment, that word, but you can also tell that you enjoy doing it, that it's not just like, oh, you better get some content out there because this is what the business needs. You can tell that you're doing it for your own reasons as well, and it comes across, and it's a lot more authentic, as I say, but also magnetic, I think, to you as individuals, and the reason why somebody would choose your podcast over a more kind of subdued or sort of generic sounding design podcast.
It's funny you say that because, we really do notice a difference when we're planning episodes. If we're, planning episodes, doing some research, pulling back the stories, and it just doesn't feel right, we bail very easily. Like I've so many times put out, spent hours and hours researching this, and in the end, I'm just like, I don't want to talk about this. This isn't anything exciting. And then we'll go and talk about something, that happened that day. And, or like that happened in today's, for today, we were going to, and I probably still will talk about this episode about the Dunning-Kruger effect, and just what we're seeing in the industry right now with employees and such. But I wasn't feeling it. And instead, we're going to talk about, the importance of having tenants in an organization and how our, 12 rules in business that we, have on skateboards on our walls, how they affect our business and it switches so quick. It's so important to talk about things that you are interested in, even on an episode. Because if you're not interested in it, I can't see any longevity in a podcast. I mean, if it was really boring to talk about finance, which I'm sure to me it would be, I couldn't imagine doing that on a regular basis. But if somebody is really jazzed about finance and they have new ways of going about it and they're going to make recommendations and they're bringing on guests, well, then they can run that podcast forever. I don't know why I keep using finance
it's just something that really bores you. The best example.
No, it really does. Yeah, apparently so. But so I think that's key, right? And then again, that you're going to be more true to yourself. You'll be more authentic to your listeners, and it really does come out. I mean, I can try to fake a topic, but I don't think it would have the same intensity or energy as when it's we're jazzed about something, even if it is something silly like rules or tenets of a company.
Yeah, great. The way your podcast is put together, so like I mentioned at the beginning, it is mostly co-hosted with you and Sean. You have the odd guest episode, and you've got like your dope or nope episodes as well, which is where
fun with those.
Which is when Massimo and Sean talk about a new logo redesign, and decide whether it's dope or nope, basically. And how do you decide on the guests? Because were you ever planning on getting guests on the podcast? Was it always going to be co-hosted, or were you hoping to get a couple of your dream guests on eventually?
So we've had many dream guests, which is fantastic. I feel very blessed to be able to finally get to that place where I can reach out to them, reach out to peers now, people in the industry. I've always been one to reach out to other agency owners, and say, hey, let's have lunch. Let's, talk, war room. They're often hesitant. I don't know why. I mean, you're better to have as an ally as opposed to, a competitor. But now with the podcast, we're completely transparent. Yeah, we've got a business, but we've got a podcast, and this is why we want you on the show. And we're complimentary. We're interviewing these people, and it's fantastic. I mean, we've had people like Aaron Draplin. We've had James Bernard. We've had, Dan from Lincoln, like just heroes. Christy Campbell from Australia. I mean, these are all people that are well known in the space. James Martin, and they're well known in the space, they're respected in the space, and it's just cool because we're actually talking real talk with them. We're not, like the regular fluff. We're having, we're getting deep. We're finding out, the struggles that they have. And again, this isn't a design podcast, but it is for designers. Do I think our model's going to change? I mean, we have a lot we have Will Patterson just this past week. Oh my God, that was our most recent one. We get a lot of compliments from our style and how we're interviewing people. And, we've done surveys. We put, we've asked a lot of our Angry Designer listeners, how much they want. And it still doesn't seem like they want us to turn into an interview podcast. But it seems like the flavor is about, a third of our podcasts. It would be nice to have that. Now, the challenge, of course, is, we are very targeted to graphic designers, and and because we're not necessarily a design podcast, we want to make sure whoever we bring on the show has direct value to graphic designers. And this might be the challenge, the first time that I'm finding challenges in being in a tight niche, because I don't there's a lot of different people we can get out there, but the fact that we've always got that gauge. What's the benefit to our listeners? How are they going to get value from this that's going to help their lives, help their careers, help them professionally, personally? And it's going okay. We've got a guest coming in the next little while that's, a web guest. However, he started in the space as a graphic designer. He made that transition. I can make that sale happen. We spoke about somebody potentially, who, is a branding expert and can help people from creative agency side. And, there's value there as well. So, it is a challenge, that's for sure. But I think it'll be worthwhile in the end. Yeah.
And it's interesting you mentioned Christy Campbell and your unique style, because Matt, the guy you just mentioned, he had Christy Campbell on. Listening to the two of your interviews, very different. Like, not saying one's
very different,
better than the other, or better or worse, but
yes.
You tackle it from different angles, different kinds of questions, different kinds of energy, and that makes it interesting. So, fans of that guest, they can listen to multiple interviews with them, and they're not exactly the same on every podcast they're guesting on. So that's good.
Absolutely. There is a certain level of entertainment in our podcast, and by that I mean, we're pretty outgoing. We're brash, we're bold, we crack a lot of jokes amongst ourselves. It's a conversation that we're having amongst ourselves, and we just have a bunch of people listening in on it, which is kind of what it often feels like, which, is the feedback that we get. We get the whole, we like that you're raw, that, you're kind of, you say it how it is. We don't hold back. And that is part of our whole angle, that it's just, we're the angry designers. But the funny thing is, the angry part, although there's some of that's true, of course, that there's a lot of issues that, really grind my gears that I feel need to be said. At the same time, I'm Italian. I'm very expressive. I'm very passionate about things. And my whole life, people are always telling me, I always sound and talk like I'm angry. And I'm like, I'm not angry. I'm just Italian. And this is just what we do. So this is where it was just like, we can totally make a good spin on this. So although, certain things do kind of, upset me and they need to be mentioned, I think the anger is more relatable to passion in our space. And that is why we're doing what we're doing. It is purely, a pursuit of passion.
Yeah, I think just after a minute or so of listening, people realise that it's not just like your two guys genuinely angry, just sitting in there seething about, getting grumpy about issues.
Yeah. I wonder if that name, though, has maybe pigeonholed us a little bit. But I guess that's a branding exercise we got to get past.
I know, but it's that niche, isn't it, I guess? And
it is that niche.
You can see you've got a lot of reviews and that on Spotify. A really large amount of reviews, actually, for a podcast that's been going for a few years.
Spotify does seem to... people tend to... So, again, we have a very close split between Spotify and Apple. But I do find that the Spotify community, the people are proud to send us their, top podcasts they listen to. And, I love that. That's what keeps us going. Even this morning, everybody's got a rough day. And this morning, it's just, I got a packed day. I have this interview. We're doing a podcast tonight. And I was just feeling down energy-wise. And, I read a comment from somebody. They shared a note with me on Instagram just saying how they appreciated, and they loved how raw and true we were to our space, and that we just don't hold back. And I was like, wow, I really needed to hear that today. So that was, it kind of pumps you back up to know and remind you that, you are doing this for the right reasons. So I think that's the challenge. I'm not sure why other podcasters do what they do. I know these are the reasons why we do it. I'm sure some of them maybe figured out a way on how to monetize it. I was listening to your episode with Dusty, and wow, that guy's something else. Let me tell you, holy cow, I got to figure out how to monetize like him.
Oh, when he's listing all the different ways he monetizes with his voice acting.
Right?
Yeah.
Holy cow. So good on them.
Well, yeah. Thanks for listening to that episode. He does know his stuff, especially with YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
I think while it is super valuable, there is a certain amount of, he did really well with YouTube at the beginning.
Yes.
With search, and 10 years ago, it was a little bit easier to get into that if you knew what you were doing. But podcasting on YouTube is still very new.
Yes.
And he was saying that he found that as well. Like, even though he's got sort of 400,000 subscribers on his main channel, he's yet to be monetized on his podcast channel. It's not just a case that, you can, once you've done it, you can do it again immediately, especially with podcast episodes. And I know that you're upping your game with the YouTube side of things. And I think it helps that you have the footage like in the studio on location. It feels a bit more dynamic maybe than an interview recording. And then also you got your dope or nopes, so you actually want to be showing that logo on screen, which helps.
Yes. And we are trying to amp up our social game for sure. There's a short form, the long form. They're so different. Constantly learning, which thank God I have a passion for learning in general. But the game is just changing. It feels like every other month there's something new to keep up with, to try. And I'm not really an analytics kind of guy, so that's the part that hurts, to get in there and see those drop off points. What resonates, what doesn't. That's the challenge.
Yeah, I love YouTube analytics.
Do you?
Yeah,
maybe I'm just scared.
I'm not the podcast. I've mentioned it before on this podcast. The podcasting analytics generally aren't anywhere near as robust as YouTube analytics. You can really get into the weeds with YouTube, but I quite like it analysing the videos that it's done well and trying to figure out why.
Figure out why and what.
Yeah.
I definitely think there's always room for improvement. But at the same time, there's also some realization. After speaking to like Will Patterson, we had this great interview, and he's almost at 1 million subscribers. He's almost at 900 videos, and he's sponsored every time. And he's created this space, in my opinion. He's too humble to admit it, but again, in my opinion, he's created it. But even he was saying that YouTube doesn't pay nearly what people think they do, and I'm starting to see a lot more of this. I'm starting to see a mass exodus from YouTube, from creators lately. I don't know if they've changed the algorithms, they're making it harder, people aren't making money. I don't know, but which is a little worrisome, because it seems like being a YouTuber is the number one career for everybody 12 and under right now. That's what they want to be, as a YouTuber. So
yeah, it is hard.
I say we push the podcast thing more. Okay, let's figure out a way to monetize podcasts a little bit better.
Yeah, and I want to dive into, while I've got you, a bit of sort of design and branding talk. I'd be remiss to waste that opportunity. So just looking at your podcast, and if anyone wants to see an example of how to do episode artwork, then have a look at the Angry Designer on your app. And yeah, it's definitely the best episode artwork I've ever seen. Obviously, you're graphic designers, so it's not surprising. But you have a really unique cover art for each episode. With stock imagery, and you've designed it with your sort of brand and everything.
Yes.
So what I want to ask is, do you have any advice for people setting up a podcast, or maybe it's been going for a long time, but they want to get their branding sorted? Maybe their cover art is a bit dull, and they don't have consistent branding across all their content, and their sort of logo on the website and things. Can you give any tips on what people should do to stand out and to have a consistent brand for their podcast?
So I think the key word you said there is consistency, and I think that's where people struggle with, because when you're in there all the time working on your brand, you're touching it daily, sometimes or weekly, sometimes daily. People tend to get bored very quickly of their own look, their brand, and they feel like they want to change it, way too quick, but the reality is, the people who are viewing you are not spending as much time, studying and in the weeds like you are on your brand. They appreciate it. So if your brand changes, if your look changes every, 3 months, every 6 months, because you're bored of it, you're doing yourself a disservice and the people who are coming onto your platform. A campaign, an advertising campaign usually runs between, a year to 18 months minimum before people start even remembering and recollecting, what they're looking at on a regular basis. So, when you're working on it, it's normal to get bored and want to make a change, but those changes, they're doing you a disservice. And it is only to satisfy your own itch. The reality is, you almost have to create your brand look, your own brand guideline, and be like, what, whether I love it or hate it, I'm sticking to this, and let it run 12 months minimum, if not 18, and our channel has evolved a little bit, but for the most part, we've kept the same font. Trust me, I want to change that font. I'm so sick and tired of it, but, we've kept our 2 fonts. We've kept our color red, of course, with the black, and, we've got, everything has a very impactful, very, in your face look and feel. And it's very consistent. Consistency is key. And I think that's the number one piece of advice I want to, whether you go on Canva and get it done, which you can free, whether you're a Photoshop whiz or Illustrator, depending on your skill set, there's so many tools out there right now that you should be able to, you owe it to yourself and to your subscribers to, create a brand and stick to that brand. Because I think, long-term, the payback is tenfold, 100-fold if it is. But if you're changing it too often, no, it's too hard to keep up with.
Yeah, and looking at yours, you've got that red and the black and white images as well, which you use a lot. And then what's nice is Spotify automatically changes the background to match the color of your cover art. So you've got a red background on Spotify, which is cool.
It's cool, right?
Any tips for people putting together their cover art?
Faces tend to work very well, and they're captivating. But I find even more so shock factor. For those taglines, people aren't going to read, and sometimes it's challenging to keep, your, the title or the message on the cover art to 7 words or less. But the reality is, it's you want to make sure that things are big and bold and have some sort of shock factor to stop people, because often they're looking at this on their mobile device, or it'll come through on their car as they're driving. They don't always have the luxury of listening to podcasts at their computer on a daily basis. So when you're dealing with artwork that is really tiny and needs to be viewed on mobile, it needs to be simple, bold, and the message, you can't have people think about it. So I'd say stay away from long titles. Faces tend to work if you can make that work, of course. And between faces, long titles, and try not to make them busy. And I know that sounds crazy because ours intentionally look busy. But again, if people are spending too much time trying to read it, trying to get the message, you'll lose them. You've got 3 seconds to capture their attention and make them understand that, they want to watch this episode. So make those 3 seconds count.
Yeah, simplicity, bold. Simplicity is definitely a key one. Just looking at yours, you've got the white angry designer title on a black background with the 2 of you, and then stay angry. And I think people sometimes who haven't gotten into design or anything, they kind of overcomplicate it in their heads. It's really quite easy to put together a good cover art. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be the most amazing piece of unique design work you've ever seen, but to be in the top 10% or so of just like a quality piece of cover art that you can see when it's really tiny on your phone, pretty much all you need to do, like you say, is have a really clear, bold title that's not too big. and it's in like a clean font that's not going to sort of look outdated or is not going to give a certain impression of the kind of podcast it is, just a clean basic font. Like even just the title on a plain background of your brand color is often enough. And I think people could definitely overcomplicate things.
It's easy to get caught up in trends and stuff, right? And people will want to, to thinking that they're doing themselves a favor by looking current. But these trends are often busy. They don't work well on a smaller device, on a small screen, and then again, you're constantly reinventing yourself. So I agree. Simplicity, bold, easy to read. I mean, these are all really, really important tips that people should be, focusing on for their podcasts for sure.
Yeah. One trend I think is when people get like a headshot of themselves and then get it done in a cartoony style, or like a sketch style or something. And I know that can work for some podcasts if it's the right kind of podcast. But if you're just thinking it will make it look more interesting and the podcast just does not suit like a cartoony version of you, then it's not worth doing just for the sake of it.
Absolutely.
And then colors as well. Have you got any thought? And you've picked red, which to me seems pretty appropriate. One, because it's part of your brand for your agency, and also because of anger. I think typically
right.
people
passion,
think,
right?
Passion, of course, yeah. Have you got any tips for people if they don't already have a brand for their business, or maybe they do have a brand but they want the podcast brand to be completely separate? Any ideas or tips on picking colors or a color?
Well, again, I mean, this could be an episode all on its own about, the art of branding, of course. But, your colors that you select need to reflect your brand, right? The challenge is your brand, you can only do so much to try to pretend to be something that you may or may not actually be, right? And where I'm going with this is, I could tell you, I could make you close your eyes and say, listen, I'm, a 6'9", basketball player that I can fly through the air. But as soon as you open your eyes and you see me play, you realize this guy can't play basketball for the life of him. So, the trick with branding is you have to, sadly, it goes back to being authentic. It goes back to, you have to dig deep to see who you actually are, what you're actually delivering. And then your brand has to actually reflect that. And I think that's the key with a lot of podcasters. I find a lot of the podcasts out there that I've listened to, they don't feel authentic. They feel like they're trying to be what they think their listeners want them to be, or what they, and it's not being truly authentic to them, which means they're not being authentic to their brand. This was a big thing for us to do is to realize, we are who we are, and we're definitely not for everybody in the space. And we were okay with that in the end. Ultimately at the beginning we pulled back a little bit, and it just wasn't us. And so I do think when people are starting to choose, or build, the visuals to bring out their brand, I think they have to, dig deep, who their audience is, choose fonts that reflect who they are, who their audience is, what their long-term vision is. Choose colors that reflect that same intensity, emotion, what that objective is, and be self-aware. And that's the key. So, if you want to portray that you're this hard, edgy brand, but really you're on there and you're giving positive, sweet messages, something's not matching up. And I think that's the key with just branding on hold. Make sure that, what you're trying to portray, is actually matched with the creative that you're delivering.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be like if your cover art was, a picture of you in a suit, clean shaven, just like sitting there like that. And
can you imagine?
And then the kind of listeners you'd attract, and then they start listening, and it's like, oh, what is this?
It doesn't work, does it?
Yeah. But I appreciate that I'm asking you to condense years worth of sort of design learnings into a 5-minute question. But hopefully that will be enough for someone just starting a podcast to, at least guide them in the right direction of putting something together that stands out.
True. Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
You look at some podcast artwork and it won't even have the title of the podcast on it. It'll just be like the company logo or something. And I'm sure that the podcast hosts could do a little bit more in, and I know some of them do, in guiding the podcaster with what to do there when they upload their cover art.
Absolutely. On the flip side, I've seen some podcast artwork that, the image of the person is very conservative, very successful, suit wearing, but then they're talking trashy and this and that, and it's just, again, it doesn't work. It doesn't seem like, I'm looking at you, you look like you're a financial expert, but what's coming out of your mouth is making you look like an amateur at this space. So, it's, people get caught up on that. So I think the more authentic, the more you can do what you want with your podcast artwork to attract people. But the thing is, if you're attracting the wrong kind of people because it's not the message you're delivering, it's not actually who you are, the retention is going to go out your window. It's going to go out the window. So it's better to be more authentic upfront. If you're a financial guy, but you do this, from your basement in a baseball cap and you're scruffy, throw that out there, because there's gonna be people who want that kind of advice. They may not want the clean, polished financial guy, and this is where it goes back to being self-aware who you are and who your audience is.
I want to finish up with a few quick questions. Just how you, I know you like to end with a few lightning round questions with your guests. I wanted to turn that round on you today, and throw a few quick fire questions your way.
Uh-oh.
If you're up for
Not
that.
prepared for this. I'm always up for it. It's funny. Now I know what it feels like to be on the other side.
Yeah. I thought I'd torture you. So yeah, let's go. There'll be a few. It's mostly podcast questions. I'll throw a few of your favourites in there as well. So, dream podcast guest that you haven't been able to speak to yet.
David Carson.
And what's more important for a podcast growth, consistency or quality?
Consistency. Showing up.
Favorite podcast listening app?
Spotify.
Oh, cool. Okay. Because the next one is Mac or PC.
Mac, 100%.
Know the answer to that one, but I thought it would be iTunes, actually.
I haven't touched a PC since I was maybe 14 years old and forced to in school, so it's been a while.
Yeah. It's sort of the other way around for me. I had Macs as kids and in uni, but
and then you went to the dark side.
I did.
Sorry about that.
Yes. Favorite superhero?
Favorite superhero? Batman.
Nice. Favorite episode, if you can remember, that you've ever recorded?
It's one that didn't do well, oddly enough, and I don't know why. Maybe it's the time of year, but we did a Christmas episode about 2 back where we dug deep about the origins of how everything came about, where a Christmas tree came from. And I thought that was great because I loved learning about this and commercialism and how it all came about to what we know now and how commercial, and I thought it was great. It didn't do so well. People don't want to listen during Christmas, or they just don't want to learn about Christmas. I don't know.
Yeah, hopefully it was just to do with the time of year rather than...
I hope so. Because it was fun learning about all that. That's for sure.
Yeah. Favorite band?
Blink-182.
Oh, awesome. Good choice.
Yeah.
And one thing you wished you'd known before you started podcasting?
I wish I had better knowledge of the technical side of it. I feel that was the struggle, and still is in some ways. I mean, lighting, holy studio lighting, this is a whole other world. And we were just talking about me complaining about this darn camera. So I wish I had a little bit more knowledge on the technical side coming up. I know what I wanted. I just didn't know how to achieve it. And so that was a big struggle.
Yeah. I think a lot of...
But then I just found you and everything was solved. So there we go.
Yeah, that is one way around it.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate you giving me an hour or so of your time, Massimo. And I'm sure that's going to be super useful to any podcaster. I think a lot of podcasts out there could do with a retouch or a look at their branding and a think about how they're putting themselves across as well with their personal brand. So thank you.
Yeah, not a problem. Again, I'm a big believer in, obviously in the importance of branding, but ultimately now the importance of authenticity. And those two go so hand in hand that I think it's only to everybody's best. It's in their best interest to do this and seek this and be self-aware and maybe have some honest conversations with yourself about it. And I'm sure it's going to work out for everybody.
Absolutely. Thanks, Massimo.
Yeah. Thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate everything you do for us. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Podcasting Amplified. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow or subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. We'll be back next time with another conversation offering more insights to take your podcast to the next level and help you to achieve success. Happy podcasting.